First off, I want to thank everybody for being here for our first Tuesday at the Metro Archives. We've got a great program today. You know, we meet every Tuesday, the first Tuesday of the month. November 4th will be coming up, and then we'll have Michaela Houghton from the Cumberland Compact Association. She's going to come and talk about the Cumberland River and the efforts to help restore the river. So please come back for our first Tuesday in November. Today we have Tom Vickstrom. He's the Director of Finance at the Hermitage Hotel, and he's going to talk to us today about the Hermitage Hotel and the history of it. And as you can see from the title, I think it's going to be pretty fascinating. So without anything else, I'll turn it over to Tom Vickstrom.
Thank you, Ken. I've been a big fan of the Metro Archives for a number of years now, and all kind of great discoveries and help from the staff has come about from just visiting Metro Archives and putting some hours in there. I'd recommend you do the same. And the same goes for Tennessee State Library and Archives. They have the most professional staff there who's glad to help, and they have just a great treasure trove of information there, not only of Nashville, but the whole state. And you'll see a couple examples here. I don't have every single photo credited, but a lot of the images did come from either Metro Archives or the TS in LA, and a number from the hotel, where we've gradually compiled, over the past 10 years mostly, compiled a pretty good archive. The Hermitage Hotel itself is almost too vast a topic to try to cover. Certainly more than a century of operation, has had many, many things happen there, great and small. And one of the most fun parts of my job is when a guest walks in and has some kind of story. They usually call me. Their grandfather may have worked there, or somebody had their honeymoon there, or they have an old book of matches, or any number of things. And the stories are so varied and interesting, bits and pieces that come up. And you'll see a bit of it today. We're specializing in banquets, as you can see. And who doesn't like the grand hotels and grand banquets? Kind of like the train stations, the old train stations, people coming and going, and all kind of interesting things happening, a lot of activity. So without further ado, we will forward this. Yes? Sure. Thanks. Okay. The hotel opened on September 17th, 1910, and to great acclaim, had a grand banquet. The doors were thrown open to the public, as they used to say, throw the doors open to the public. And everybody was amazed and fascinated with the beauty of the hotel and the ornateness. And it was not Nashville's first grand hotel, but it was the first grand hotel of the 20th century to open in Nashville. And of course, we're now in our second 100 years. But so the grand opening was on September 17th, 1910. This banquet pictured here took place about 3 weeks later, and it was to honor Joseph Howell of the Board of Trade. And the Board of Trade were the backers of the hotel in terms of promoting that a new hotel be built in Nashville, and they organized the sale of stock, going door to door, and generating quite a bit of community support for the financing and the construction of the hotel. So the prominent banker, Joseph Howell, was moving to New York, and they held this wonderful banquet. You can see it says flashlight photo. That must have been sort of a camera flash feature. But the menu, it gives the appearance of being somewhat French. Can you read it from your seats? An elaborate menu. And it's a bit of a challenge to produce such a large menu for a large number of people. But you'll see the culinary team was well able to pull that off. I'd like to talk about research and discovery just for a moment. A few years ago, I was at the Metro Archives when they were in Green Hills location, and I spent probably 4 hours there trying to learn whatever I could about the hotel. And then my wife joined me after work, she drove in and she walked down the bookshelf and she said, "This one looks interesting," kind of, "this one looks interesting." And it was the greatest find of the day. It was a wonderful book called Our Food Heritage, and it's published in the late 1950s. It's all about Nashville, the pioneers, the cooking of the great old plantations, the clubs, the hotels, and the restaurants right up through the 1950s. And there was a section in there about the Hermitage Hotel, and that's where we learned the name of the first chef of the Hermitage Hotel. His name was Umberto Corsini. In fact, he was not the head chef, but he was one of the chefs. So with a little detective work, we looked up the family. That's somewhat of a rare name, Corsini. And before you know it, we had this is the chef's picture on the right, standing in front of his culinary creations. And his granddaughter is the elderly lady there, and then her daughter and her daughter. So several generations of the Corsini family there. Chef spent his whole life working in Nashville. He started in New York. He came over from Italy speaking no English. He became an apprentice in some of the large New York hotels. And the story goes, there was a recruiter offering good-paying chef jobs in Nashville and Kansas City. And when he went to the train station in New York, the Kansas City train had already departed. So, and that's straight from the family where I heard that story. But the family brought in this is the back of an old picture they brought in. And it's not quite clear to read, but it essentially says the grand opening of the Hermitage Hotel, September 1910. And it was, when we turned it over, that's what we had here. It was a wonderful picture of the original culinary team. And we believe most of them came in by train from New York. The hotel had some opening support from the famous Waldorf Astoria Hotel. And but the man in the center was the main chef for about 4 years. His name was Camille Ravad, born in France. And Mr. Corsini is immediately to his left. Mr. Corsini learned how to read and write. He mastered the English language quite well. As you can see, this is one of his handwritten menus dated 1916. And about the fifth line down, he's got Baked Rockaway's Hermitage. And those are that was 50 cents there. But the family donated about 6 months of daily handwritten menus from Chef Corsini. We had the picture brought into a professional who restored and enhanced it. The Scotch tape mark is gone, as you can see. And it's just a beautiful image. And that was taken in the grill room, today's Capitol Grill. And we'll show a close-up of that a little bit. Culinary village to the left, you see a ham, then some kind of a gingerbread house, a castle. There's what looks like a fish in the center with a castle behind it, a cake, some other kind of gingerbread house or something, and then a bread creation. And you can see the oval platters that they're setting on, and the table's decorated even with some electric lighting. So that was the grand opening of the Hermitage Hotel, and that was the culinary team who proceeded to do great things. Another discovery came from TSL&A. A lady named Darla Brock called me one day and said, "Tom, in one of our archives, we discovered the original Thanksgiving menu of the Hermitage Hotel." And sure enough, it's dated September 1910. And so she scanned it, sent it over. And if you can read it, it did include the roast wild turkey, chestnut dressing, and cranberry sauce. It's a plentiful menu, but not too overly complicated, as any chef would know. If you're feeding masses of people, several hundred people at a time, it's best to keep it a little bit simple. But it's a simple yet sophisticated menu, and it features some local bounty there as well. On the menu was this beautiful emblem, and that was the original crest of the hotel that was custom designed. It appeared on china, even the name tags, and the linen, and the stationery, and of course this menu. So we put that menu out on display for that Thanksgiving that particular year, so the public could enjoy it when they came for our Thanksgiving feast in the lobby of the hotel. And I came in just to take a couple of pictures and take a look at the banquet and see how it was going. And I sent the image over to Darla Brock the next Monday, said, thanks for the menu, we put it out on display. And she said, Tom, did you know that I was there when you took that picture? And sure enough, she was right in the center of the very picture. How's that for a coincidence? So that was a typical Thanksgiving brunch there. Then we found the original Christmas menu that would have been just 3 months after the hotel opened. That's December 1910. And pretty elaborate. It's got canape of lobster. It's got, they like the clear green turtle soup. And I've split it up, of course, into two sections. But roast Tennessee turkey with stuffing and cranberry sauce, plum pudding, etc. And I think the pricing was probably $1.25 for dinner. And I just had to put this in for fun. This was Nashville's first Christmas tree. My wife discovered this one. That was in Capitol Boulevard, which is right up the street here across from the library, Capitol Boulevard. That's looking up towards the state capitol, and you can see the hotel is in the background on the right. And would we have any volunteers to climb up that ladder and put the star on the tree? That was 1911. There's a picture of our first chef, Camille Ravad, born in France. The press gave a lot of great coverage to the massive and well-equipped kitchen of the Hermitage Hotel. There are several great news articles. And this is a picture inside. Runs things on a big scale. 5 barrels of flour used every 3 days. But some of the, well, here it is. All the equipment that was put in had the latest in technology, as the entire hotel did. But they had, for example, 2 36-inch French charcoal broilers, a heavy 2-section gas range, 1 gas waffle stove, 1 gas cake griddle, 3 large, heavy hand-hammered copper steam kettles, 1 solid cast iron 4-compartment steam cooker, 16 metal sinks, 1 massive solid steel cook's table, electric automatic potato peeler, and on and on and on. It was just all the latest in technology. And you may be able to tell in this picture, well, I should note, these pictures came, again, from Metro Archives. We discovered them through TSLA. They have a search engine called ProQuest, where you can look up old newspapers. And we found 10 cents a page. We printed off all kind of neat images. And then we came down here and asked Ken, could he pull the original newspapers? And they have a number of them in storage and brought over. So, and you can open them up like a book. It's absolutely fascinating, each page of the paper. You can't stop reading them once you start. But we had a professional photographer come in and try to get good pictures from the newspaper pictures. And you can see they're not great, but you can get an idea what it's all about. You can see there was a silver service set up right inside the kitchen. And the first 5 or 6 gentlemen on the left are African American. And the hotel did feature Southern cooking, and I'm sure a lot of that skill came from those men. This picture came from NES. This is probably in the 1940s when they took pictures of electric-powered ovens all across the city. This picture was not taken in Nashville, but it features President Taft and at the time Governor Woodrow Wilson, and they both would come to Nashville, Mr. Taft in 1911, Mr. Wilson in 1912, and they both came to the hotel. William Howard Taft's Banquet was one of the finest, or let me backspace there, excuse me, one of the finest ever held in Nashville at the time. The menu is here. I'm not sure if you can read it, but the chef tucked his name in there, cucumbers ravad. It's one of the items on the menu. But they had a breast of Tennessee chicken, Southern style, so they gave the president a little taste of the South. And it was a grand event. Plates were $7 each, open to the public, 200 guests. And a Hungarian orchestra played music, and there was also a Yale chorus singing some of the president's favorite songs, as he was a graduate of Yale University. Here's a picture of the banquet. Mr. Taft would be gentleman there in the center. Hard to make him out, but a number of prominent Nashvillians there for that grand event. And you can always tell the grand ballroom of the hotel by the distinctive Circassian walnut paneling you can see in the background. Here's a picture of the, it was originally called the main dining room. We call it today the grand ballroom. And it looks today much like it did then. We have the same Circassian Russian walnut paneling, the same metal chandelier fixtures, and the ornamental plaster ceiling, which incidentally was designed by Russell Hart, resident architect, and he's the man who rebuilt the Parthenon in the 1920s. And he designed the executive residence and many other buildings. So moving right along, here's another. This was originally named the Loggia. This is on the front side of the hotel. A very beautiful room clad with terracotta. If you hadn't seen it, I invite you to come in and have a look. And very popular place for banquets. Here's a couple from the Metro Archives again, from the old newspapers. And you have to love any building that has a mezzanine level somehow. I just like that. That's a half floor. It's above the lobby. In fact, the women anti-suffrage group was headquartered there during 1920. But this was a special occasion for the Jackson Ball, which was one of the premier social events of Nashville for many, many years. And that's taken up on the mezzanine level of the hotel. Down on the lower level was the grill room, which today is the Capitol Grill, our fine dining restaurant. And this is just one of the neat bits of ornamental plaster that you can find in the grill room. This is actually looks like a banquet of Neptune. It's an under the sea plaster image with, you can see fish are holding up the platter of food. In 1918, this was a different kind of a banquet. The Red Cross operated the hotel in a fundraising drive for one day. They did everything from bellhops to servers in the restaurant, and this was taken in the restaurant. They had a very, very successful day raising funds. And little did they know, but there was a secret tucked away in one of the walls of the restaurant, that had been put away 5 years earlier. We found an old menu dated 1913 in a crack in the wall when we did our 2002 renovation. And it was a great discovery. I split it up into two parts here. At the top, after theater music and grill by hotel orchestra. And you can see the sense of fine dining and style on the menu. And you can just imagine those talented chefs producing this kind of food. Here's the bottom half of the menu. And they definitely had quality refrigeration in those days, and they had must have used the trains to bring in all kind of food from across the country. This was another discovery found at Ward Belmont College, now Belmont University. They have some scrapbooks there from the young ladies who were students. They have a collection in their archives of old scrapbooks. And we were turning the pages looking through, and lo and behold, a 1917 menu was found. One of the young ladies kept as a souvenir. And it's a very, I know you can't read the detail, but it's a very full menu. And here's the very bottom of the menu. And one of the interesting parts here is the little footnote about food conservation. This was during the Great War. It notes that even though you couldn't possibly ask for anything more than what's already on that menu, it does say, we ask our guests to confine their orders to the menu insofar as possible. We do not ask this from any mercenary standpoint or to deprive you of any of the luxuries of life, but from a patriotic duty in our national crisis, the management. Thank you. So, in fact, at that time, the hotels and restaurants were signing pledges to have a meatless Monday and a wheatless Tuesday, and they were limiting sugar and so forth. Before long, the troops came home. This image came from the Tennessee State Library, and it was touched up. There's a bit of a mystery here. Everybody in the crowd is looking up into the sky. So I'll leave that to anybody want to venture a guess why that might be? We think there was an airplane flying overhead, or a squadron, yes. But the returning troops paraded through all the major cities of Tennessee, and 3 different divisions came home. And this one was through a temporary victory arch heading towards the state capitol. Hermitage Hotel in the background on the left. And one of the returning heroes was Nashville's own Albert Gleaves, and he was the one that ferried troops across the Atlantic. He was in charge of transport, and he apparently brought 80,000 servicemen to and from without a single accident or injury. Quite a commendable record and a feat of logistics. But he had his hero's welcome at the Ryman Auditorium, ceremonial swords given to him, and a grand banquet at the Hermitage Hotel. And this was the souvenir menu. And back in the day, Toastmaster, speeches, ending with the way of the admirals and home again. But, and on the left is the menu, ending with cigars, as you can see. So it must have been a grand occasion. These 2 menus side by side, you can tell they're from the, probably from the same printer, the certain style of menu design there. And it's kind of a masterpiece, the way the menu's laid out with so many entrees artfully arranged. And they've also used bold print for suggestive selling as to what the clients might best enjoy or what the hotel would prefer they order. But this menu on the left was from November 1920, and I was mentioning the suffrage and the suffragettes, pro and anti, probably ate from that very same menu, because that was only 3 months earlier when the famous suffrage battles took place in Nashville. But very full menu. By that time, we no longer had Camille Ravada as chef. We had a gentleman from Portugal. We had a long-term chef named Manuel Silva. He was from the Azores Islands in Portugal. Here's just a close-up of one of those menus, and just a lot of interesting things to look at there. One of them is Mrs. Kidd's Pin Money Pickles, individual jars, 25 cents. So now we're into the roaring 20s, and I think they did know how to have fun. Here's or at least most people in this picture seem to be having fun. This is a movie projectionist union having a banquet dinner, and this was before the era of talking pictures, they were projectionists for silent films at that particular time. This was a convention, same year, 1926, a group photo taken out front. And here's a close-up. I hope you like the flower pot hats and what appears to be maybe a raccoon coat on one of the ladies. And here's another from Metro Archives, thank you. This was a harvest ball, 1929. Everybody enjoying themselves, and I'm sure they had a fine banquet. And then here's an altogether different menu. This is from the 1930s. A different printer, a different chef. We had a new chef come in named Alfred Vagliazzo, Alfred S. Vagliazzo. He was from Italy. So our first three chefs were French, Portuguese, and Italian. And he was a very accomplished chef. He also came in from New York, where he learned his trade. And here's the Depression had hit. This is a little promotion. You've heard the wooden nickel. Don't take any wooden nickels. This really is a wooden nickel. Good for mid-morning coffee break at the hotel. So here's a recap of the first main chefs, the first three. This is Mr. Vagliazzo in the hotel ballroom before a banquet, and a famous musician, Francis Craig, is in the center, and another of his musicians there with him. He looks rather stern, but in fact, when we've met the family now, in fact, we had the family in a couple of months ago for lunch, and he was a very fun-loving gentleman and a phenomenal hard worker. So here's a lighter moment. We don't quite know the occasion, but that's the chef in the center there. And a lot of merriment being enjoyed by the guests. Here's a picture from the 1930s that was in the grill room. You can see the sense of high style, from the hats to the shoes, and there's a pack of Camel cigarettes on the table there as well. But you can see the silver service in evidence. Here's another fun picture. This one's dated 1939. It was kind of the antebellum South look. And everybody knows what BNA stands for, what BNA is, Nashville's airport, but not everybody knows BNA stands for Berry Nashville Airfield. And Mr. Berry is the blonde-haired gentleman, second from right. That's a 1939 banquet in the ballroom. And he's talking with Eddie Rickenbacker, who was one of the World War I flying aces, who was president of Eastern Airlines by that time. They're talking about establishing air routes from Nashville to St. Louis. And some of these things we take for granted all came about somehow. Here's a fraternity banquet in the grill room. And a political legacy is extensive, particularly in state politics at the hotel. This is Senator McKellar, who made the hotel his headquarters when he was in Nashville. They say he's credited with bringing Oak Ridge to Tennessee, but he was in office for a long, long time. This is comedian or singer and entertainer Al Jolson, and they say he was as big as Elvis at one time in the 1930s. Here's another stylish menu, the cover of a menu, dining and dancing in the grill room. And the menu actually was 4 pages during the World War II years. It very much flourished. And these are just clip-ons. You can see the outline of paper clips that were clipped onto the main menu. But Chef Vagliazzo did an outstanding job producing the food. and to the music of the Francis Craig Orchestra. Hard to believe, but there was a 13-piece orchestra in the grill room, and they had a theme song, Red Rose. You can see a rose on a table there. They played Red Rose with every meal. And the hotel progressed with civic and business meetings, associations, conventions, etc. Here's one from the 1950s. Here's one from the late 40s. This was the Exchange Club, who used to meet once a week at the hotel. Here's another. And I'm sure many here know who this gentleman was. Anyone? Frank Clement, that's right. Mm-hmm. Had great speaking ability, so they say. Here's a... Yes. How about this lady? Any guesses? She was the manager of the Ryman Auditorium, and the one that made the Ryman great. Her name was Lula Naff. And for probably 40 years, she was the manager of the Ryman. And this was her retirement party in 1955. She received telegrams and letters from stars all across the world. And this reception was held in what was formerly the Iris Room of the Hermitage Hotel. Here we have music great Owen Bradley in the foreground playing piano. And Duncan Hines is here at left. He used to publish a directory and a guidebook that was probably the most widely read restaurant guidebook across the United States. And there's an amazing book that's been published about his life. But he'd be a celebrity when he came into your city because nobody wanted to not be highly rated by Duncan Hines. So the city named it Duncan Hines Day when he came to Nashville on this date in 1953. And he's checking the soup out in the kitchen. Here's one of our next chefs. We had a change in management. Richard Hall, actually change in ownership, and with that came Dick Hall, another one of the great managers of the Hermitage Hotel, Cornell School graduate. And he brought a chef with him, as oftentimes happens. And here's a culinary creation, a little Christmas village made entirely of gingerbread and of sugar. And Mr. Hall had his children living in the hotel with him. By now, this is a 1965, different chef in this picture. But there they are in the kitchen, so-called helping out, and I think having a lot of fun. But you can see the clipboards on the back of the picture. Those are very much like we use today. There's one for each day of the week, and you can keep organized as to what's happening banquet by banquet. The Hall children, they've come back, and we've gotten to know them, and they remembered helping what they called dish up for banquets. One put parsley on, and the other helped with other little aspects of plating up the banquets. And here we have an altogether different menu. You may see that there's a shell of a menu on the right side, pre-printed. And on the left side, you can run it through a mimeograph machine or a duplicating machine and put today's specials on there. And that way you could seasonally alter the menu or put whatever was unique for that day or week. Bit of a close-up, if you can tell. Not quite as fancy, but it's a very abundant menu. That was in 1956. And the banquets continued. I believe this is the mayor. Ken, do you recognize the mayor? Is making this gentleman honorary citizen of Nashville. this particular picture has the governor of Oklahoma and the governor of Alabama being presented birthday cakes, which were provided by the governor of Tennessee, Governor Ellington. It's a happy occasion. That was in 1962. So we're going to fast forward a little bit here. The hotel flourished and then went into a long decline later in the 60s, and particularly the 70s. It closed at the end of 1977, was totally renovated and reopened to much fanfare and joy of Nashville in 1981 as a Park Suites hotel. And this was the grand opening banquet menu, March of 1981. And a number of great chefs have since worked there, but they reestablished fine dining in the grill room. And we've heard some of the stories. Chef Terry Hagen came by and stayed overnight recently, and he explained how things were back in those days. And it was they were in high style. They had a number of the stars and celebrities were flocking to the hotel once again. Anybody recognize anyone here? Jimmy Dean, that's right. Jimmy Dean's the tall gentleman there.
Archie Campbell.
Well, I'm not sure. We think the lady in the foreground is Louise Mandrell.
Yes.
And in the background left with the white hair is the one and only Minnesota Fats. He lived in a hotel for 6.5 years. And he did not miss many parties there. I put this one in because he liked to produce his own banquet. He would feed the pigeons every day. He'd come to the kitchen and get breadcrumbs, and he'd feed the pigeons in the alley. This, just a beautiful picture. It says celebrating 77 years. And of course, now we're to 160 years of operation. This banquet was held for 30 people, complimentary by the Salvation Army, and it was in the ballroom of the Hermitage Hotel. This gentleman was out-of-work security guard, brought his children in to have a nice Thanksgiving banquet dinner. And if you note the presidential pictures in the background, there's Jackson and Johnson. The next photo features the lady who painted those pictures. And her name was Janet Swanson Hassenfuss. She was from Franklin originally. And the pictures are in the background there. But this picture was taken for our 100-year anniversary in September of 2010. And she was one of the invited guests and enjoyed seeing her paintings after she had not seen them for 30 years. So she walked into that room with some trepidation, wondering how she would critique her own work done some 30 years before. And it was a very happy day for everybody. And Beth Odell of the Public Library is here in the picture too. She's Beth Odell of the Nashville room. And I should credit Beth with having generated just an amazing number of historical pictures. And then particularly when we produced our centennial book, The Hermitage at 100, in 1910 on our 100th anniversary. The book has 300 pictures in it. If anybody didn't eat before you came here, anybody getting hungry? In recent years, we have established our own farm, Double H Farms, in White Bluff, Tennessee, right across from Montgomery Bell State Park in the Dixon area, 40 miles west of here. And we also have 2 acres under cultivation at the Glenlevin Estate, just 3 miles south of downtown, compliments of the Land Trust for Tennessee. So we have, these aren't cattle, these are donkeys. They keep the cattle calm, I'm told. We have 150 head of cattle being raised at any given time. And we have our own fresh produce, true farm to table. from our own farm nowadays. And what a talented chef can do with that bounty is just fantastic. This picture I just took on Saturday when I went by. They were plating up for a banquet dinner, and that was just from my cell phone camera. But that's all fresh produce from our farm. And as a throwback, this is a poultry convention of 1912. Just had to put that one in there. They had some great banquets, and I think they were all primarily wearing white cotton because there was no air conditioning, trying to keep cool. And we're still waiting for the banquet to come that'll top this one. This banquet was, actually we have a picture of this in our lobby, and I invite you to come up and see it. But this picture has no caption on it in our lobby, and we didn't know the story behind this picture until a gentleman came in and said this banquet was held to honor my grandfather, and I have the very same picture framed in my home. And he said my grandfather was named Luke Lee. And Mr. Lee is the tall gentleman in the background with the, by the American flag there. So then, knowing the date, which we found out, we were able to look it up in the newspapers. And the newspaper had word for word all the words that were said in the speeches, a description of the room, the menu, and so forth. But Mr. Lee had been newly elected to the United States Senate, and the banquet was thrown in his honor. So, and here's a more contemporary photo. Today, we're here to where wonderful new occasions take place and new memories are made. And, the magic continues in the 2nd century at the Hermitage Hotel. The end.
You're right, I'm hungry.
Could I try to take any questions, or? Yes?
Do you happen to know, as far as, was there formal training required for the first ones? If so, where did they receive it? And do you know what their wage was, like for the first chef? Any idea what, is it listed anywhere?
We haven't run across that, but we did find a consumer price index. When we found that 1913 menu, we wanted to see what a 60-cent steak would be worth today, and learned that the consumer price index, I believe, started in 1914 and has multiplied about 25 times by now. So hard to say what the wages were, but we know what some of the bellmen made, and Mr. Vagliazzo, who we found him in the 1940 census, and amazingly, he'd asked how many hours did he work last week. The answer was 72 hours, and his annual wage was $3,240. And I think that inflates to about $60,000 to $65,000 today. So I hope that helps. Yes, Ken?
Tom, I noticed you had a couple of photographs in there, and you were able to find the descendants of those folks. And I mean, that's a great idea. What prompted you to do that? Just the history of it, or?
Well, we wanted to just find out the story behind the picture. Mm-hmm. And in the case of Mr. Corsini, Roberto Corsini, we just did basically a Google search on the web, and we found an obituary of his son, who was a linguistics professor at Father Ryan, and in that listed his children. So then we just did another search, and I made a couple of blind phone calls, and I said, "Are you Mr. Corsini's descendant?" And the lady was just delighted to say, "Yes, I am. And, would you like to come in for lunch?" Sure. And so we've had a couple of great discoveries that way. Yes, sir.
Let me ask you, where are you from?
I'm from Massachusetts.
I'm just amazed that you've gotten all this interest and have done this. I just thank you for doing it.
Well, thank you. the families and the public really appreciate when it comes alive.
But weren't you with several historic hotels previously?
I'd worked at the Jefferson in Richmond, Virginia,
Yeah.
which our company owns and operates today as well. Beautiful hotel. If you have the chance to go to Richmond, please visit the Jefferson. But I started just coincidentally when I was a boy. My best friend that lived down the street, the family owned a resort on Cape Cod, Massachusetts. And I started going there during spring break and then during high school summertime jobs there. And I always said, I wondered, his father once took us to Boston to an auction of a grand old city hotel that was closing up. And I think somehow that made an impression. All the old chinaware and chairs and chandeliers and everything that was being sold off, and just the grandness of the ornateness of the hotel, and it seemed like the walls could speak. So the walls do speak. Thank you.
This is just a general remark. I don't know how many people of you know this, but Tom had an article published last month in the Nashville Retrospect. And if anyone is interested in any of those issues, I think there's still some. And the archive's available for what, $1 or something, just down the hall. It's a really great article.
Well, thanks. That one featured the Duncan Hotel, which was a great hotel of the 1890s. Thank you.
We
And-
appreciate all your sharing the history with us.
And the
It's
Maxwell
really
House,
great.
the Maxwell House before that was the granddaddy of Nashville hotels, from 1869 through right up till 1961. But the glory years were the first 3 or 4 decades. And thank you, Malcolm.
And one thing, just another remark, it's really strange just looking at the transition of how things have gone the last 100 years. We had all these great hotels in downtown Nashville. I think the last great new one was the Knoll Hotel in 1930 or something like that. But then anyway, by the 60s, they had built James Robertson Parkway, and they had gone to the motor lodges like Travel Lodge. They built the Holiday Inn and Ramada Inn and King of the Road, and now those, I think, are all gone, and we're going back to the big downtown hotels again, which were out of favor in the early 70s. And now they're coming back and just everywhere.
There's a lot of new ones coming. It's going to get very interesting. Uh-huh.
Did you notice on the prices, what was interesting, they didn't use a decimal point or the little figure for cents. I guess everybody just assumed, if you look at some of it, it was like 50. And so it was just 50 cents for stuff. It seemed like in the 1950s is when they actually prices started to go up. It was actually, $1 for some of the things. Have you noticed that on any that there was no
That is
decimal
interesting.
point or?
That is interesting. And the inflationary periods too, both the World War I and World War II brought about a great deal of inflation when the prices went up.
Well, let's give Tom another hand. And
Thank you.
well, I appreciate Tom being here, and he loves the Hermitage Hotel. So if you have other questions, just ask, and he'll be able to answer them for you. I appreciate you coming. If you're watching, thanks for watching. We have November 4th coming up with the Cumberland Compact Association. I appreciate you being here today. I hope you enjoyed the background music. So that was wasn't my choice, but we have a committee. So thank you for being here, and have a good afternoon.